Welcome to the Herbs in Action COVID and Beyond Replays, Session 4, Food and Practices for Immune Health with Thomas Easley. This session was sponsored by the Herbal Nerd Society in partnership with The Practical Herbalist and Real Herbalism Radio, also Mud Paw Design House.
The information provided in this session and this summit is not intended to cure COVID-19 or any other disease. Due to the novel and emerging nature of COVID-19, no herbalist or medical professional can claim to cure or know how to cure this virus. We are not responsible for the healthcare choices you make, including your use of food, herbs, or any other substances for any reason. This information is not intended to diagnose, treat, or otherwise take the place of a doctor's advice. Seek professional medical advice if you suspect you have COVID-19 or other health problem. This information is provided for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed in our summits are those of the speaker alone and are not that of Herbs in Action or the Practical Herbalist. Use this information wisely.
So now I have the very wonderful honor of introducing you to Thomas Easley, functional herbalist and founder of the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine. Thomas's unique approach interweaves traditional herbalism, clinical nutrition, and functional medicine in a practice he calls functional herbalism, the art of medicine and the science of wellness. Thomas, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me and for hosting this wonderful event.
Thank you. And I will mute myself out now. You have it. It's yours. And
Okay.
I'll let you know if there's any really pressing questions. Otherwise, we'll hold those to the end.
Okay, and is my PowerPoint showing on your side?
It is.
Perfect. Okay. So hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in to my section. We're going to have a fun class on food and practices for immune health in general. I think it's really important that we, as practitioners facing a novel virus that nobody actually has a clue what to do about, focus on the things that we're good at, which is bolstering our immune system with holistic practices that many of us know how to do and frequently forget how to do in the face of overwhelming everyday stress and fear and all of the other stuff that goes along with a global pandemic. So let me get my clicker working. So let's dive right in and talk about the immune system and some things that we can do to make sure we have an optimal immune response. So a lot of people think of the immune system as separated into the innate immune system and adaptive immune system, and that's true. There is the innate and adaptive immune system, but many people forget that part of the innate immune system is our protective surfaces, so our skin and mucous membrane. And I'm going to be highlighting in on that, but think about it like this. We are surrounded by billions or trillions of critters that float in the air, that are on every surface, that occupy every orifice. And those things, those critters don't get into our bloodstream unless one of our protective barriers has been compromised. So if it weren't for your skin, all of the critters floating around in the air would cause like instant bacteremia, sepsis, and death, right? So our skin is vitally important, and our mucous membranes are too. It's helpful to think of the immune system kind of like a filter, and I've got a slide that illustrates this. So we have, you know, the overall adaptive immune system on the left-hand side of your slides, and the innate on the left-hand side and the adaptive on the right-hand side. The innate immune system is a non-specific system that blocks everything that it doesn't recognize as self, and the adaptive immune system takes about 10 days to really reach peak effectiveness for most infections. And so the innate immune system holds the line until the adaptive immune system can create a specific response to whatever pathogen there is. So it's helpful to think of this as layers of filters. right? So we have pathogens from our external environment trying to get in, and they are met with physical barriers, our skin and mucous membranes. And then they're met with physiological barriers. This is things like the acid mantle of our skin, or the fact that sweat and snot contain enzymes that are antimicrobial. And if pathogens penetrate past the physical and physiological barriers, they meet a generalized inflammatory response that suppresses their ability to replicate. And then they meet the full, what is considered the classical innate immune system. This is our phagocytes, with macrophages being the most active in most acute infections, and especially in COVID-19. And macrophages then are part of initiating the adaptive immune response by creating these cytokine and chemokine signals. Cytokine signals travel throughout your body and prime the rest of your immune system. And the macrophage activation via cytokine upregulation primes our complement system, our natural killer cells, and our dendritic cells. Our dendritic cells are phagocytizing whatever damaged cells or microbes they find, and then presenting them to our adaptive immune system. So notice that by the time we get down, to, and I keep changing slides instead of okay. So I can't use a highlighter. Notice that once we get down to where it says adaptive immunity, there aren't many pathogens left. And this is an essential concept. There are multiple layers that are filtering out the amount of pathogens that our adaptive immune system has to deal with. And in COVID-19, this is really important because research seems to indicate that the severity of illness seems to be directly correlated to the length of exposure to someone with an infection and the initial viral burden. What this means is researchers are seeing more severe infections in healthcare workers, because instead of being exposed to, a million little virons from one sneeze, they're exposed to trillions and trillions of little virons from multiple people sneezing on them. And the more of the virus you are exposed to, the worse the infection is. So it's really important that we, number one, practice hygiene and appropriate social distancing so that we minimize our exposure. But number two, it's really important that we understand that the viron exposure is to the membranes underneath your snot. So you have a layer, a barrier of snot over your mucosa, and snot really should be a superpower. Jim McDonald calls it a superpower. It contains enzymes that are antimicrobial, the pH, the way that the snot molecules are linked together to cause a physical blocking action. So not only do we have to take into account the amount of viron exposure that we're getting, but we have to take into account how much of that gets through our snot and onto our mucous membranes that have those ACE2 receptors that SARS-CoV-2 loves to bind to, or needs to bind to actually infect our cells. So I'm really into supporting the immune system by making sure that our barriers are intact. And Larkin just did a great presentation on traditional tongue assessment and energetics. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of what she said, but I would like to focus in on mucosal dryness as a predisposing factor for any type of respiratory infection. If we look at the research, there's a lot of reasons why viral infections are more prevalent in the wintertime. One of those is that the air is drier in the wintertime, and therefore viron particles spread more easily through the thinner, drier air. The other kind of rarely talked about reason is, I believe, not only does our environment tend to become more dry in the wintertime, but our mucous membranes tend to become more dry in the wintertime. And we have multiple studies showing that something as simple as running a steam humidifier in the wintertime can reduce the rate of upper respiratory infection. They study this in nursing homes and found that there is a 30% across the board reduction in upper respiratory infections just by keeping air humidity at around 50% instead of the more classic 30 to 40% that occurs when we run our central heat or wood-fired stove, or whatever source of heat we have is probably going to create a lower air humidity, leading to mucosal dryness. We do derive some of our mucosal moisture from the atmosphere. This is why we have, one of the reasons we have sinuses. Our sinus cavities are designed so that when we take air in, we circulate it, warm it, and make sure that it is at the appropriate moisture level before inhaling into our lungs, where there is less regulation of the moisture. So mucosal dryness is a huge factor in my opinion, in any type of respiratory infection. And luckily, as herbalists, we have a superpower. We have demulcents. And demulcents are moistening remedies that mainstream medicine doesn't have. There's not a medication that you can take to promote mucosal moisture. And to be clear, I skipped the step of proper hydration. You've got to stay hydrated to make sure that your mucosa stay moistened. But I'm an herbalist and I like to talk about foods and herbs. So let's focus in on that. I'm assuming that you're already drinking an adequate amount of water, that your mouth is not regularly dry. If your mucous membranes are still dry, as evidenced by a tongue that looks like one of those pictures we just saw, where there's not much coating and it's withered and it's cracked, then demulcents are called for. And demulcents are broken down into 4 basic categories: our farinaceous, oleinaceous, mucilaginous, and gelatinous. You have many of those probably in your kitchen pantry already. Most people have oatmeal available, or rice, or barley, or some sort of grain. If you take any grain and add more water than you would, cook it low and slow until it becomes a gruel, you are going to bring out the longer chains of sugar molecules bound together that creates the mouth texture that we call sliding, right? Think about like mushy oats, okay? That's perfect. That's exactly what we want to promote mucosal moisture. So I've been doing distance consults with people with COVID-19 since the beginning. And one of the first things that I do is I have people give me like over the phone kind of an off the top of their head inventory of what they have available in their kitchen. Because if possible, we want to prevent people that have an infection from going out in public looking for herbs or asking anybody else to. And I have had a lot of people say that the changing point for them was when they started moistening their mucosa, and they did so by making oatmeal and slathering it in honey. Honey isn't on the list because I really don't know where to put it, but honey is, and sugar is, they're some of the most classic demulcents. If you look at traditional systems of herbalism, anytime they wanted to counteract the drying nature of an astringent or a diuretic or any of the drying remedies, they would often add a little honey or combine that drying remedy with a syrup of another remedy. And that is because the longer sugar chains found in honey, and to a lesser extent, the shorter sugar chains found in table sugar, promote moisture and mucosal moisture kind of more specifically. So if you're looking for prevention, you don't have to look much farther than a good bowl of oatmeal and honey, and maybe throw, whatever favorite spice in there that you like. I'm a fan of ginger and cinnamon in my oatmeal. So we've got, in any grain works, any of the farinaceous, any of the grains act as farinaceous demulcents. Most people also have something mucilaginous, and mucilaginous demulcents are the most classically talked about demulcents. There are slimy demulcents, and there's a slew of them. I put just a few on the list because I tried to get everything on one slide for easy reference, but almost everything in the mallow family is slimy. A nice southern mallow family plant that many people in the South, at least, have available is okra. So okra pods, boiled, fried, it doesn't matter how you do them, they're still going to be slimy. And boiled okra is one of the most moistening remedies that I know of. It's widely available in grocery stores. Fenugreek is another kitchen spice that is mucilaginous. You can bring out the mucilage pretty quickly by adding cold water. I prefer to add hot water to fenugreek that is ground, and then once it cools down, stick it in the fridge and leave it for a couple of hours. And as it settles and chills, it becomes even more slimy. And the additional benefit is that the aromatic compounds in fenugreek are gentle expectorants. So fenugreek is a super appropriate kitchen spice that tends to not promote drying like many aromatics do, but rather promotes moisture. Violet is another mucilaginous one that I put in. Even though it's not available in many kitchens and not commonly eaten as a food, it really should be. And it is blooming like crazy where I am. So, I've been putting violet leaves in salads, which I should probably eat more of. Violet flowers are a nice garnish, and it's a readily available herb that helps to promote moisture throughout your mucous membranes. We have our oily demulcents. Nuts and nut butters are a really good way to do this. My favorite is probably almonds. In fact, almond decoction, or I really like almond and sesame seed decoction, is a traditional Chinese remedy for promoting upper respiratory health. It's kind of used in dried out respiratory conditions. Any of your oily demulcents tend to work, but the oily demulcents tend to promote moistening in people that are deficient in oils, whereas the mucilaginous demulcents tend to promote moisture in everyone. So if you eat a low-fat diet, or if you find that it's not just your mucous membranes, but also your skin that's really dried out, consider focusing on the oily demulcents instead. And then we have our gelatinous demulcents. Gelatinous demulcents aren't talked about that frequently, but the taste of the free glutamic acids in gelatin increase mucosal moisture. There's some really interesting studies for people with chronic dry mouth syndrome, and they found that supplementing with glutamic acid or giving them powdered gelatin supplements helped with their chronic dry mouth syndrome. And a lot of people have either gelatin or something that has gelatin in it, like, you know, bones to make a bone stock with, or better yet, you know, bones that have a lot of connective tissue. So knuckles, hooves, feet, the more connective tissue, the more gelatinous your meat stock or bone broth is going to be. And Irish moss is not found in most kitchens, but it is used as a clarifying agent in home brewing, and so you'd be surprised at the number of people that have a little bit of Irish moss because they're into brewing, and that can be done as a strong infusion to make a mucilaginous, gelatinous demulcent drink that doesn't taste great but is super moistening. So my first tip for immune health is keep your mucosa moistened. In the cases that I have seen, the ones that tended to be more severe were the ones that went into the infection all dried out to begin with. So prevention is key here. Take a look at your tongue in the mirror. If it doesn't look plump and moist, then consider upping your hydration game and using culinary demulcents to see if you can get your mucous membranes more moist. So if pathogens get past our snot into our the membranes under the snot, the mucous membranes themselves, that's where they encounter our second line of defense, and then in a few days, hopefully that's where they encounter our third line of defense, our adaptive immune system. So our first line of defense is, you know, generally our macrophages, and there's some interesting things with COVID and macrophages and the types of macrophages that are in the alveoli versus the type of macrophages that are surrounding the nerves in the lungs. And some are pro-inflammatory and some are anti-inflammatory. But what we know is that macrophage activation is one of the driving factors in the development of the acute respiratory distress syndrome, or the more severe COVID pneumonia. And macrophages crank out interleukin-6 to let the entire body know that, like, you know, things are going down somewhere, probably in the upper body. They're not super specific about their signals, and the entire body should become prepared for the infection. And then as that first line of defense gives way to the second line of defense, we have our B cells and T cells. So our T cells are required to activate our B cells, and macrophages produce cytokines that directly influence the differentiation of our T cells. And I would love to nerd out on T helper cells and cytotoxic T cells and naive T cells and how they differentiate and what cytokines they differentiate under, but that would take way too long. So here's what I'm going to say. You have a lot of nutrients that are required for a proper adaptive and innate immune response. And let's focus on the things instead of the theoretical mechanisms. Let's focus in our limited time together on the things that we can do that might actually make a difference. So immunoregulatory nutrient number one is vitamin A. And vitamin A isn't a single compound, it is a family. All of the fat-soluble vitamins aren't single compounds. They're families of compounds that act as vitamins and hormones at the same time. So across the bottom, you see retinol, retinil, and retinoic acid next to each other, and these are preformed vitamin A. And then beneath that, you see a larger molecule. That larger molecule, and for some reason the captions aren't showing up on the screen, but the larger molecule is beta carotene. And we, and by we, I mean almost everybody incorrectly uses beta carotene or says beta carotene when they mean vitamin A. But beta carotene is not vitamin A. It is a provitamin. It has to be cleaved in half for it to act as a vitamin A, for it to act as a immunoregulatory hormone in the adaptive immune system. So the cleaving of beta carotene into vitamin A is dependent upon enzymes that our body produces. And the more inflamed we are, the less beta carotene we convert to vitamin A. And even without inflammation, the rate at which we convert beta carotene to vitamin A is variable. If you look at a vitamin and it says 5,000 IUs of vitamin A, and then in parentheses it says beta carotene, is not actually vitamin A. It's 20,000 IUs of beta carotene, and they assume a 1-to-4 conversion ratio of takes 4 beta carotenes to convert into 1 molecule of retinol. And that assumption is based on some old studies and people that fall under a bell curve. Newer studies that are small but significant because of their results show that only about 50% of people convert beta carotene to the equivalent amount of vitamin A. And that conversion is not a 1-to-4 ratio, but can be a 1-to-1 ratio or a 12-to-1 ratio. It really just depends on the person, their genetics, their current nutritional status, and their current nutritional status, genetics, and their inflammatory burden. So if you have hypothyroidism that isn't treated well, if you have diabetes, you probably aren't going to convert much beta carotene into vitamin A, which means you need to consume preformed vitamin A in the form of retinol, retinol ester, or retinoic acid. And preformed vitamin A is only found in animal products. You won't find preformed vitamin A in vegetables. Vegetables contain carotenoids, and beta carotene is a carotenoid that can be converted under the right circumstances into vitamin A, but isn't in everyone. So get your preformed vitamin A. If you eat a diet that is rich in animal fats and proteins, you probably have adequate vitamin A. If you're on a low-fat diet or a vegetarian or vegan diet and you don't supplement with preformed vitamin A, you might be deficient. And vitamin A is necessary for the production of immunoglobulin A, which is the immunoglobulin found in snot. So vitamin A creates a non-specific immunoglobulin, part of the adaptive immune response that is kind of unique. And that's housed predominantly in mucus. So having adequate vitamin A is necessary for a robust mucosal immune response. In states of severe deficiency, you see much higher rates of mortality with other infectious diseases. So for instance, they found that in developing countries, supplementing with preformed vitamin A will decrease the lethality of measles by 50%. That's a huge decrease in a pretty dangerous infection. So get your preformed vitamin A or supplement if you don't think you're getting enough in your diet. My favorite supplement is cod liver oil. I don't think the fermented cod liver oil, which tastes really, really, really gross, I don't think that's actually superior to any other like normal unfermented cod liver oil. I'm a fan of Carlson's and Nordic Naturals and Sunny's cod liver oil, which is kind of a raw cod liver oil. Great sources of omega-3 in the form of EPA and DHA, great sources of vitamin A, and they do contain a little bit of vitamin D as well. So consider supplementing with somewhere between a teaspoon and a tablespoon a day of cod liver oil if you don't consume a lot of preformed vitamin A in your diet. Vitamin D is another fat-soluble vitamin. It's actually a family of vitamins. We're familiar with the vitamin D3, but there's vitamin D2 and D1, and your body converts that into the active form calcitriol, predominantly in the kidneys. And that calcitriol is essential for T cell activation. When any of the antigen presenting cells, in the case of COVID, it's probably dendritic cells, when any of them gobble up a pathogen and spit out a little piece of it for the immune system to identify as bad, it sends out the pathogen, and it sends out a little receptor for vitamin D, for calcitriol specifically. And vitamin D deficiency blunts the entire adaptive immune response. And in most infections, we're banking on the adaptive immune response and the production of antibodies to prevent reinfection. So if you are vitamin D deficient, then you're going to have a lowered adaptive immune response and lowered antibody production, and be more prone to an extended illness and more prone to reinfection or reactivation, kind of depending on what the illness is. Vitamin D comes in the ergocalciferol, or D2. This is the type that you find in mushrooms and is added to dairy products. So if you drink milk, you're getting vitamin D2. It's gotten a bad rap, and I'm not sure why. It stays in circulation longer than D3. It can be converted into calcitriol as easily as D3. Our body produces D3 from sunlight, but it can utilize D2 just fine. So I'm a fan of getting vitamin D in any way that you can. When you buy mushrooms from the store, sit them out in the sunshine for an hour before sticking them in your refrigerator. You'll increase their vitamin D content. Or when you harvest mushrooms, do the same thing. And don't knock the vitamin D found in dairy products if you're not intolerant of dairy. It can be a significant and beneficial source of vitamin D. Vitamin D is also produced from sunlight. So sun strikes your skin and causes the production of vitamin D3, or calciol. The angle at which the sun strikes your skin is partially responsible for determining the amount of vitamin D that your skin produces. And the further north you go, the more shallow the angles the angle of the rays of the sun are, and as they strike your skin, they tend to bounce off instead of penetrating in and stimulating the production of vitamin D. So if you draw a line across the country and you live much north of like central Ohio, you can bank on little to no vitamin D production from sun exposure for about half of the year. The further north you go, the more that is extended into the rest of the year. So the angle at which it strikes your skin is part of the production, and the temperature of your skin is part of the production. I had to make a public retraction 3 or 4 years ago, because in the like mid 2000s, I came upon some research that compared serum vitamin D levels of lifeguards to surfers, and what they found is that the lifeguards had much higher levels of vitamin D than surfers did, and they hypothesized that the exposure to water was somehow washing off vitamin D. And so I taught that for about a decade, and then a few years ago realized that I hadn't kept up with that specific line of research, and that was total crap. And the reason why there was a difference in vitamin D production between surfers and lifeguards was simply the temperature of the skin. If you're in the water, your skin temperature is less and you produce less vitamin D. So if you're going to maximize your vitamin D production from sunlight, don't go sunbathe and then hop in the water or go to an air-conditioned place. Rather, sunbathe and then allow another hour or so for your skin temperature to stay elevated and slowly come down. The sharp decline in skin temperature is probably one of the things that decreases vitamin D production from sun exposure. Let's see. So sunbathing provides benefits above and beyond the production of vitamin D. The exposure to different wavelengths of light produces different responses in the body, and the full spectrum light that you get from sunshine is beneficial in a lot of ways above and beyond the vitamin D production that you get. Your vitamin D produced by your skin is D3. The vitamin D2 that you got from your mushrooms or milk is then converted into the active form of vitamin D called calcitriol. And when we test vitamin D, what we're looking at is 25-OHD3 calcidiol, or 25-OHD2 and 3 that's taking into account both. And that is a proxy for our actual active form of vitamin D called calcitriol. So what we know is that the amount of storage form influences the amount of active form, and that for immunity's sake, optimal levels are between 40 and 50 nanograms a milliliter. You can get too much vitamin D. You can get too much vitamin A. I didn't mention that, but you can technically overdose on any fat-soluble vitamin. There's only been one reported case of death from vitamin A, and that was a hunter that ate a polar bear liver and got a one-time dose of about 6 million IUs of vitamin A. So don't do that. Don't eat a polar bear liver and get too much vitamin A. Keep your daily intake to around 10,000 IUs. With vitamin D, you can't go based on IU consumption because the rate of absorption of supplemental vitamin A varies, or vitamin D varies quite a bit. Yeah, Candace.
We had one question. I thought we should break in and ask this about this right now.
Yeah.
Carla asked, do the amounts of melanin
Yeah.
in the skin affect the ability to absorb more or less vitamin D?
So the more melanin in your skin, the less vitamin D you produce from sun exposure. It doesn't affect the absorption of oral supplements, but it does affect how much you can produce. So a light-skinned person without much melanin will produce about 20,000 IUs of vitamin D in 30 minutes of midday sun exposure. A dark-skinned person at the same level of sun exposure might only produce 2,000 to 5,000 IUs of vitamin D. So yeah, sun exposure is not a guarantee of adequate vitamin D production. Once again, the amount of skin pigment, where you live latitude-wise, skin temperature, your cholesterol level, since cholesterol is the substrate used for that, and very low levels of cholesterol can probably impede vitamin D production. There's a lot of variables with vitamin D. So what I'm going to say is, if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, I would recommend everybody go get their vitamin D blood level tested. The only way to know if you have enough is to test your blood levels, because there are all of these variables that influence how much you actually have available. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and so the risk of going to a lab and getting vitamin D drawn probably isn't worth it right now. Luckily, we know that there's a pretty wide safety margin with vitamin D. So while optimal levels of vitamin D for immunity are probably 40 to 50 nanograms a milliliter, and I just want to throw this out there, this past year there has been a strong push to say that those higher levels of vitamin D were unnecessary and pushed by one doctor that had a vested interest in the testing of vitamin D. It's total crap. It was a political game at the National Institutes of Health, and long story short, this one researcher wanted to discredit this other researcher because this other researcher was going to come onto the board, and he didn't want him onto the board because they were arch enemies, so he did this smear piece against vitamin D. The idea that sufficient vitamin D is only 20 nanograms a milliliter as kind of pushed out in mainstream media this last year is total crap and not based on the research. Optimal levels of vitamin D are probably between 40 and 50 nanograms a milliliter. You don't start getting immune impairment until you're below 20, 25 nanograms a milliliter, but you also, while a frank deficiency as defined by a serum vitamin D of, say, less than 15 or 20 nanograms a milliliter will impair the immune system, we aren't shooting for just like the minimum level to prevent immune impairment. We're shooting for the ideal level, which involves not just the immune system and specifically those T cells that need the calcitriol for activation, but the downstream production of inflammatory cytokines via T cells also is influenced by vitamin D. So while you might be no more prone to catching an infection with a serum vitamin D of, say, 20, if you do catch an infection with a serum vitamin D of 20, it's likely to produce more inflammation than if your serum vitamin D was up in that sweet spot of 40 or 50 nanograms a milliliter. If you have an autoimmune condition, you can actually suppress the inflammatory response with supraphysiologic doses of vitamin D, pushing your blood levels in that 70 to 90 nanograms a milliliter range. And a lot of people get scared of vitamin D in the bigger doses. There are multiple studies where they gave massive doses, 30, 40,000 IUs every day for months to people. And what they found is that that most people could tolerate serum D of over 150 without getting calcium metabolism disturbances, which is where the danger of vitamin D comes in. So if you take enough vitamin D to drive up your blood calcium level, then you're increasing your risk of kidney stones, you're increasing your risk of heart arrhythmias and all types of other things, but it takes quite a bit of vitamin D to do that. So my dosing strategy for someone that has not supplemented with vitamin D is to give 20 to 25,000 IUs of vitamin D every day for a month, and then back down to a maintenance dose of 3,000 to 5,000 IUs. Most people take a daily average of about 7,000 IUs to hit that 50 nanogram a milliliter sweet spot, which is much higher than the 800 IU average that the RDA gives for it. But once again, the RDA for vitamin D is based only upon blood calcium levels and bone density, not based on immunity. So ignore what the RDA is for vitamin D. Supplement with the vitamin. I rarely see people that don't need supplemental vitamin D. My practice for 14 years was in South Alabama and the Panhandle of Florida, North Florida. I had a very active practice in Pensacola, Florida, for a little less than a decade. And in that time, I tested several thousand people's vitamin D levels. And I can remember 2 cases out of thousands of people that did not need supplemental vitamin D. And they were both like bronze beach bums. Like they sunbathe all day, every day, or almost all day, every day. If you don't do that, supplement with vitamin D. You could get it in a multi. Most of the time, multis don't have enough because of the RDA and the safety concerns. Most people need an extra vitamin D supplement. And I like giving vitamin D along with vitamin K2. They work synergistically together for bone health and maybe for immune health. There's some interesting research on K2 and immune health right now. So so our 2 fat-soluble vitamins that are essential for proper immune function are vitamin A and vitamin D. Vitamin C is the primary water-soluble vitamin required for proper immune function. And vitamin C is awesome and also not magic. So we have to have a dialectical approach to nutrition here. It's not a black and white either or thing. Vitamin C deficiency absolutely leads to immunosuppression. Taking a bajillion milligrams of vitamin C isn't going to magically make your immune system better. It will only improve the immune system to the point that you reach repletion, which it doesn't take much. You only need about 100 milligrams a day of vitamin C. If you smoke tobacco, you need more. Nicotine seems to increase vitamin C metabolism and use it up more. And you can see this in people that smoke or have smoked for a long time. Vitamin C is not just essential for the immune system, but it's essential for the production of collagen, for the elastic parts of your skin. And if you've seen someone that's been a smoker for 50 years, their skin's probably going to look like not elastic. There's going to be dried out and wrinkles and weathered looking, more so than someone that hadn't smoked of an equivalent age. So if you smoke, stop. And if you can't, I understand, because I smoked for years and it's really freaking difficult to stop. But be sure that you're supplementing with extra vitamin C to offset what smoking depletes. So you need about 100 milligrams a day, but you actually don't start getting into like scurvy until you're at about 10 milligrams a day. Most people can get that from a reasonably balanced diet. Everybody talks about oranges and orange juice as great sources of vitamin C, and they are, but also just eat some bell peppers, right? Or broccoli has more vitamin C than oranges does. Brussels sprouts has more vitamin C than oranges. Strawberries has more vitamin C than oranges. Eat a multicolored diet, and you're probably fine on the vitamin C. To be clear, vitamin C by itself doesn't kill viruses. Your vitamin C vitamin C deficiency can impair immunity, but much more than the RDA isn't helpful. So, like ester C or any of your vitamin C supplements, they normally come in 500 milligram or 1,000 milligram capsules. Your body can only absorb 200 or 300 milligrams of that at a time. And 200 or 300 milligrams is enough for 99% of the population to reach full tissue saturation within 10 days. So you don't have to take fistfuls of vitamin C every day. There is a lot of talk in the alternative world about intravenous vitamin C. And I've given IV vitamin C. I've had IV vitamin C. I worked closely with a clinic that did IV therapies. I think that it does have some really cool possibilities. But to be super clear, IV vitamin C works because it increases your serum levels above and beyond what is physically possible with oral consumption. And when it does that, it stops acting like vitamin C, like the antioxidant that it is, and rather it becomes a pro-oxidant, increases the production of hydrogen peroxide in the bloodstream, which is one of those compounds that our body then has to counteract with glutathione, which our body has to produce. And if you outstrip the ability of your body to produce glutathione to counteract the radical oxides that IV vitamin C turns into, then you can run into troubles. It could be that, that IV vitamin C acts in some unknown way in ARDS. There are no trials showing efficacy of IV vitamin C for COVID. I hope that somebody does a trial right now. There are only case reports, and it's such a complex disease with so many different presentations and courses that it can take that I'm not confident enough in IV vitamin C to recommend it as a therapy, even if I knew that you had COVID. So just throwing that out there, have some broccoli and Brussels sprouts. That will get you all the vitamin C that your body can handle, unless you want to stick more in with an IV, and that might or might not be effective. We just don't have enough information to know yet. Zinc deficiencies are pretty rare, but a mild to moderate deficiency does occur in children. And the elderly, those with disordered eating, diabetes, renal disease, and GI diseases of malabsorption. So I like supplemental zinc in the form of a multivitamin for most people. And then if you were to get sick, the vitamin C lozenges might be even better than vitamin C than zinc in a capsule. Did I say vitamin C lozenges? Zinc lozenges. Yeah. Might be better. So if you eat red meat, you probably have adequate zinc. If you're a fan of almonds, cashews, walnuts, Brazil nuts, you probably have adequate zinc. Oysters are a kind of a unique and very high source of zinc. So make sure that your diet has adequate zinc in it, and if it doesn't, consider supplementing with zinc by itself, or a good multivitamin with an extra 15 to 30 milligrams a day of zinc is all that you need for prevention, and then up to an additional 100 milligrams a day in the form of lozenges if you were to get a respiratory infection. Oh, there you go. I put it on a slide for you. Okay, moving right along. I'm going to talk a little bit faster now. So let's see, my camera keeps falling. So there are foods that can optimize the immune system. Those foods contain vitamins A, C, and zinc. There's some foods that contain vitamin D, and also sunshine for the production of vitamin D is essential for the immune system. Keeping our mucosa hydrated is essential for that first physical barrier layer of the immune system. And then finally, let's talk just a little bit about immunity and stress. So our sympathetic fibers of our autonomic nervous system descend from the brain into bone marrow, thymus, spleen, and lymph nodes. And these nerve fibers can release a wide variety of substances that influence the immune response. And kind of most importantly here, our natural killer cells, which are the cells in our innate immune system that are essential to gobbling up infected cells, our own cells infected with viruses. These cells have a high density, high infinity beta-2 adrenergic receptors. Long story short, stress directly suppresses your innate immune system. But what do we mean when we say stress? And what is the stress response? So the stress response is a non-specific response of the body for any demand for change. Anytime you take a step, anytime you lean back in your chair or lean forward in your chair, you're changing your body, and there's just little bits of nerve firings that are part of the adaptive response to our changing environment. A stressor can be a perceived psychological or physical threat to safety or status. To be super clear here, the stress response doesn't differentiate between actual threat and perceived threat, which is why, you know, you're walking through the woods and you round a corner and there's a blackened stump and you swear it's a bear and your heart skips a beat and you freak out for a second, right? It doesn't matter if it's a bear or if your mind faster than you can control thinks it's a bear. The stress response is the stress response. The body doesn't differentiate between chemical stressors and psychological stressors, or, you know, physical danger and social danger. To the body, danger is danger, threat is threat. If the threat is to your identity, to your sense of self, it creates a stress response. If the threat is to your physical body, it creates a stress response. And that's really essential to understand. Because of stress's very profound influence on the immune system. Now, to be clear, not all stress is bad. There's stress that is exhilarating and motivating, and there is stress that is overwhelming and damaging. The stress response is a preparedness response. It is essential to survival. That quick skip in heartbeat and the surge as you think there's a bear around the corner is priming you to run away or fight. Okay? That's part of the sympathetic response. Allostasis is the sum of adaptive responses. So this is the price we pay for the priming to fight or flee or freeze or appease. They all have a price to pay. And our allostatic responses are cognitive and motor. They're autonomic responses, hormonal responses, and inflammatory responses. I really like a term coined by Aviva Romm, survival overdrive syndrome, SOS. Unfortunately, I think she used it as an alternative word to adrenal fatigue, which is a concept that really needs to go away because it's not accurate at all. But the SOS, survival overdrive syndrome, really does describe how many people live day to day, and how most of us live in the times of COVID. And allostatic overload, so taking on more or having more than our adaptive mechanisms can handle in a healthy way, leads to system breakdown. It leads to increased corticotropin releasing hormone, and CRH is the unsung mechanism in my opinion, in the influence of the stress response on the immune system. Your T cells have CRH receptors. You're getting production of that via the immune system and the brain. It's all connected. Cortisol, which gets talked about a lot, probably too much. It's probably more CRH than cortisol, creating the immuno responses in allostatic overload. All of that changes how our brain processes information and tends to overstimulate our glutamatergic systems and drive a fear response, which then leads to increased production of CRH and cortisol. And the whole cycle becomes vicious and self-perpetuating. So, our allostasis is the adaptations that we make to stressors. But allostatic load or overload is when those adaptations become detrimental to our health and start to break everything down. And the most important thing for stress, for burnout, for whatever you want to call it, is rest and recovery. Your autonomic nervous system can't regain balance without a feeling of safety. Now, keep that in mind. If you don't feel safe, your stress response will be activated, and at some point with extended activation, you're going to get immunosuppression. Okay? So feeling safe is an important part of immune health. I would postulate to you that it is almost impossible to feel safe while watching news. Okay, our entire media conglomerate, how was it, 3 or 4 corporations that own all of them and tell everybody what to say, like our whole way of reporting news changed with 9/11. 9/11 was the first time that there was enough news to fill the 24-hour news cycle. Before 9/11, think about it. You had the nighttime news, it was an hour. You had maybe 2 hours, and then it was done, right? You heard all the bad shit, and then, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can curse or not. I'm going to anyway. You heard all of the bad shit, and then you were done, and you could, continue watching the same station and not be inundated with fear. But 9/11 led to enough news to keep the cycle going for 24/7. And what they found is that all of the danger and all of the violence that was constantly on air kept people's attention so they could sell more ads. And after 9/11, they kept running anything they could to keep people's attention so they could sell more ads. And what keeps people attention most is feeling unsafe, is fear. And so I would postulate to you that the way mainstream media is done is inherently harmful to our immune system. Somebody should probably do a study on that. There actually have been studies on viewing traumatic events on the news and the risk of developing PTSD. There's some evidence pointing towards that. It's still a hypothesis. It's not clear, but I think mainstream news sucks. And normally, a well-curated social media platform is the opposite of that. But now, in a pandemic, even social media is not a place to go to avoid, our corporate overlord shoving fear down our throats. So I think that rest and recovery means setting some boundaries with fear-evoking everything, if possible. So we can promote recovery and an optimal immune response by finding safer spaces. To be super clear, not everybody has a safe space they can go to. A lot of people in this world live under systemic oppression, and their lives are inundated with legitimate dangers. And I'm so thankful for all of the activists and advocates out there promoting a different way of existing. Until the radical change that's so needed, anything that is safer than what you're currently experiencing might have a positive benefit on the immune system. One of the most important, one of the ways we can tell our body that we're feeling safe is to get a good night's sleep. And in fact, the earliest warning sign that you are shifting from healthy allostasis into allostatic overload is sleep disruption. If you find yourself unable to turn off at the end of the night and go to sleep, then you need to focus on chilling out. So finding safer spaces, adequate sleep, adequate nutrition and caloric requirement. You know how I said stress is stress and the body doesn't differentiate between being chased by a bear and Roundup, chemical stressors, physical, whatever stressors are the same. Your body freaks out if it doesn't have enough calories. Inadequate sleep and inadequate caloric intake are the two primary drivers of the elevated cortisol side of the stress response that directly suppresses the immune system. So make sure that you're eating enough calories. I have had no problem with that because, pandemics and junk food go hand in hand. If you aren't meeting your caloric requirement, there are a lot of really great resources, and I'll be happy to direct you that way, and keeping an eye on the comments afterwards for that. Relaxation, leisure, downtime, self-care, physical movement. Sleep is essential. I've got a new book that I'm co-authoring with Forrest Chalmers and on pain. One of our sections is on the nervous system, and we hired an amazing artist, Annie Sudev, and she illustrated the whole book for us. And so I'm showing off some of her ant photos for now. Adequate sleep, and how much is enough? Well, probably more than you're getting, right? Like 8-hour minimum, probably 9 hours should be the minimum during stressful time periods. Even when you're getting enough sleep, take some time to smell the flowers and chill out. Find a hammock, get outside in nature. Stay at home doesn't mean stay in your home. It means, don't go out in public around lots of other people. You know where lots of other people aren't? In the middle of national parks, right? They're not in the middle of nature. And you could be, and I hope that you will take some time to spend more time outside in nature, filling your mind with the sensory like orchestra that is just being in nature, being mindful of the thoughts in your head and the sensations that you're feeling and smelling and seeing, instead of the constant monkey chatter, self-narration that we spend so much of our lives indulging and probably shouldn't. Adopt meditation if you can. Meditation is easy. It doesn't have to be sitting cross-legged and chanting Om. It can be knitting or crocheting or playing a musical instrument. Anything that enters you into a flow state counts as meditation in my book. A robust immune response means a healthy nervous system, and you can't have a healthy nervous system without connection to others, without intimacy and love and friendships. We are a herd animal. We are designed to interact with others in social groups. Luckily, we can do that on platforms like Zoom. We can have conversations. We can open up to each other about things. We can, for the people that we're in self-isolation with, we can spend more time being physically affectionate and cultivating love and wonder and joy, and that is directly beneficial for the immune system. Rituals are a great way to cope and to externalize the internal chaos that we're probably all feeling. It doesn't have to be, you know, lighting candles and praying. It can be a cup of coffee and reading a book in, you know, every morning as a routine. The idea of rituals is not only an externalization of the internal, but it's in creating routine and structure. Routine and structure allow our nervous system to feel safer. Our nervous system says, oh, well, if they do this every day and they aren't getting eaten by a bear, then when they're doing this, there's not a danger of a bear. Okay, so create some healthy rituals. I love the ritual of tea. Drink more tea. Herbal teas are great. Any type of tea is great. Make it and drink it. The ritual of just preparing the tea is therapeutic in and of itself. And I know I am running short on time, but let's just do a progressive muscular relaxation together. Okay, so you're sitting in a chair, and this should be fun. So everybody at home, look at the camera and scrunch up your face, and then relax it. And then tense up your arms, and relax it. And then tense up your shoulders and chest, and relax it. And then tense up your legs, and relax it. And breathe in, and breathe out. And just that, just something that simple, a couple times a day, acts as a somatic practice to bring our awareness back to our body, to inform us about tensions that we might be feeling and allow us to discharge those, becoming more aware of what stress is doing inside our body is an essential part of making sure that stress isn't impairing your immune system. Forest bathing, spend more time in nature. I've got a whole section in this book on the benefits of forest bathing. There are studies on the sounds of nature modifying the nervous system response. The green light spectrum, the 530 to 40 nanometer light spectrum, creates an anti-inflammatory response systemically in the body. The aromatic compounds released from the trees and plants in general modulate the nervous system and the limbic system specifically. There's a ton of things that just getting outside in nature, even for a little bit, can do for you. We have a lot of herbs. I would postulate that most people use herbs that are way too stimulating or way too sedating, and our nervous system really isn't the fight, flight, and freeze response. Our parasympathetic nervous system is broken out down into ventral and dorsal vagus nerves, and the ventral vagus nerve interacts in a part of our brain that we call the social engagement system, as found by Stephen Porges and introduced to the herbal world by Quinny Hell. The social engagement system is what puts the brakes on both the parasympathetic response and the sympathetic response. Your sympathetic response wants your heart to beat so fast and hard that it explodes. The unopposed sympathetic response wants that. And your parasympathetic, unopposed parasympathetic response wants you to freeze, shut down, and die. And what holds the center is the ventral branch of the vagus nerve that interacts with the limbic system and the neocortex to put the brakes on the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And the more strongly we push the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system, the more likely we are to create imbalance. So I'm a real big fan of using gentle tonic remedies like milky oats, ashwagandha, skullcap, damiana, things that aren't super sedating, but that increase your tolerance to stressors becoming stress overload. So Nerve tonics in large doses all can sedate, but most nerve tonics aren't that sedating unless you need to sleep. If you have sleep debt and you take a nerve tonic and you feel sleepy, it's probably because of the sleep debt, not because of the nerve tonic. Consider supplementing with these, you know, any, all combos, whatever. You find a good herbalist, work with a formula. And, you know, the more stress you're exposed to, the more important holding that center social engagement system is. And practices that we've mentioned and herbs like this can be an essential part of that. So in summary, keep your mucosa moist, optimize your immune response with a nutrient-dense diet, and tend to your allostatic load by intentionally creating space to unwind, to get adequate sleep, to connect with loved ones, to meditate, to spend time in nature, and consider turning off the news. That's what I got. Candace, thank you so much. You have questions that have come in?
There are some questions that have come in, actually a decent number of them.
Okay.
I'm going to jump to Daniel from the Herbal Nerd Society. Says, is it safe to take immune boosting herbs if you're taking immune suppressing drugs like after an organ transplant or something similar?
No.
Yes, which herbs are safe and which are not, as relates specifically to immune health, not including trying to figure out other conditions or the organ that was transferred or whatever.
Yeah, so if you have had an organ transplant, there are no safe immunostimulatory herbs. So anything that you've heard of as an immune stimulant and anything that you've heard of as an immune amphoteric should be avoided with organ transplant. There's this theory in the herbal world that there are immune amphoterics that balance the immune system, and I'm not sold. The research on that isn't solid, and I have seen every air quotes immune amphoteric that I can think of cause flares in autoimmune conditions. I've seen flares in autoimmune conditions from reishi, which isn't supposed to do it. I've seen it from astragalus repeatedly, which isn't supposed to do it. I've seen it from, you know, echinacea. I've seen it from elder. I've seen it all types of things. And if you have an autoimmune condition, there are things you can do to mitigate that, to mitigate the overstimulation effect. But I have not found anything that would make me feel comfortable using any immune amphoteric or stimulant in someone with an organ transplant.
Okay. Coral asks, this is a vitamin D question. Does the age of the person affect sun absorption of vitamin D? And does vitamin D need to be done daily, or will it work well to promote calcium plus, forgot the correct name, absorption if one has high levels of vitamin D or is already showing good storage in the liver? It's very complex.
Okay, so repeat the first part again.
Does the age of the person affect sun absorption?
Yeah. Number one, I don't know. Okay, the next part was?
Does the vitamin D need to be done daily, or does it work well enough to promote the calcium absorption if you have already good storage in the liver? Yeah,
so it doesn't matter if you supplement or not. What matters is the blood level. If your blood level of 25-OH-D3 is adequate, then you don't need to supplement. If it's not, then you need to either supplement or sunbathe and retest. You don't have to take it every day. It's fat soluble. I can never remember to take my vitamin D every day. But when I look at it, my little vitamin D supplement bottle, and I think, it's been 4 days since I've taken vitamin D. I pull out 4 capsules and I take them all at once.
Okay.
So you can, you can dose vitamin D once a day. You can dose vitamin D once a week. You could maybe get by with less than that, but kind of once a week is the minimum dose for supplemental D, in my opinion, because you don't want to take more than 40,000 IUs at a single time, because 50,000 and, well, I guess there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but the studies show that 50,000 IUs and above cause transient spikes in serum calcium, which have unknown significance and probably aren't as bad as constant spikes in serum calcium, but still something that we want to avoid and can easily do by dosing 40,000 IUs or less at a time.
Okay. I'm going to ask another supplement question. This one's about zinc. And the question from Stephanie is, how effective is ionic zinc supplementation?
As effective as any other type of zinc supplement. Ionic zinc doesn't offer any benefits over zinc citrate, zinc picolinate, all the forms of zinc are roughly equivalent. The ionic zinc is popularly used for what's called the zinc tally taste test, where if you take it and you don't taste bitter, they say that you're sufficient in zinc. And to be super clear, the zinc tally taste test is not accurate and doesn't work. And ionic zinc tastes just god awful. And if you have it, take it. But after that's over, save your palate some troubles and just get something in a capsule. I take a multivitamin every day or 3 that I remember, and that has an extra 30 milligrams of zinc in it, and I feel like that's probably enough for me.
Okay. We have a question from Bob of the Herbal Nerd Society. He says, I've heard the term herbal antibiotics used to describe some herbs. Are they really effective?
No. I should probably elaborate. The idea that we would want to shove these beautifully complex creatures that are plants into modern little allelopathic boxes because it makes them easier to comprehend just blows my mind. Herbs don't act like antibiotics, and by antibiotics I mean they are absorbed from the gut into the bloodstream, build up to a known level in the bloodstream, diffuse across to the tissues at known levels, and then kill bacteria of certain varieties. Herbs don't work that way. And there's books out there about herbal antibiotics, and it's crap. Herbal antivirals are the same thing. The idea that we know how, the specific mechanism of how an herb works on a virus is largely based on test tube studies that probably don't have much, if any, correlation to actual living beings. Herbs, like that, the anti-everything approach in herbalism really leads to a overly reductionistic and mostly ineffective model. It's practicing green allelopathy. Right? So anti-inflammatory doesn't tell you how it reduces inflammation, what type of person it's most appropriate for, what contraindications are, same thing with antibiotics, same thing with antiviral. We just don't know enough about the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics of plant constituents to understand those mechanisms in us. So I would encourage you to not focus on antibiotic and antiviral, and rather look at how, before those terms existed, herbs were used to treat people with what we now know are infections.
Okay. I have 2 more questions here, but I think I'm going to save one for the panel and give you the option of deciding which one you'd rather talk about right now.
Okay.
One has to do with cytokine storms, and the other has to do with the connection between the immune system and lungs, immune health and lung health.
Okay.
Which one sounds more attractive at the moment?
Let's do cytokine storms.
All right. So Carly is asking, what is a cytokine storm, and is elderberry the only herb that can trigger this?
Okay. So a cytokine storm is a very profound and often deadly immune response. Cytokine storms don't happen because you take elderberry or echinacea or any other immune stimulant. They happen because the immune system is confronted with an overwhelming amount of damage. And the damage associating the damage associated molecular pattern. Damn, I forget what the P stands for. Anyway, there's pathogen associated and damage associated compounds released in infections and in tissue damage. And those hyperactivate the immune system, which is great in the case of infection, but if the infection is driving tissue damage, then all of the compounds that should stay inside of our cells that are spilling out into our interstitial fluid or blood that don't belong there are recognized by the body as not belonging there, and the immune response is amplified above and beyond what it would be for the infection because of all of the damage. Can elderberry cause this? Not by itself. You could eat a pound of elderberry a day and would never experience a cytokine storm. But if you didn't cook your elderberries, you would experience a lot of crapping. Elderberries by themselves can't do that. Do elderberries increase the risk in COVID? Nobody knows. I have seen elderberries exacerbate autoimmunity. There's one small study showing an upregulation of interleukin-6, but there are problems with the study. So what I'm going to say, long story short, is that everybody that has an opinion on what elderberry can and can't do in COVID has that opinion based on limited research. Research probably not robust enough to make definitive statements. It's very unlikely that elderberry contributes to cytokine storms, but unlikely doesn't mean impossible. So I'm not a huge elderberry fan in general. I'm a huge elderflower fan. Elderflowers were traditionally used, but elderberries aren't that traditional of a remedy. They really didn't become popular until the 70s or 80s, and the research on them being an antiviral is all in vitro, and there's a couple of small studies showing decreased time of having a viral infection. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to conflate the association of decreased time having a cold with an antiviral action in a plant that is a known immune stimulant, because we don't want to assume the mechanism is antiviral when it might actually just be immune stimulatory. I could probably continue ranting about that, but my point is nobody has enough information to say with 100% confidence that elderberry is good or bad in COVID. There's just not enough information. Based on the use of elderberry in other infectious diseases, it's unlikely that elderberry would stimulate or exacerbate a cytokine storm. But because I've seen elderberry exacerbate autoimmune conditions, I want to throw that, maybe a little caution and prudence should be taken with any immunostimulatory in a novel infection with a really weird immune response.
All right. Well, thank you so very much, Thomas. That was a lot.
You're welcome. I'm sorry I went a little bit over time.
Oh, no, I think that was absolutely fine. We have gotten a couple of people asking if your slideshow will be made available.
Yeah, I'll send you my slides and you can post that out to people.
Right. So we'll get that up there hopefully tonight or over the weekend. I'm not making too many promises just because that's a lot to do.
Sure.
But all right, well, thank you so very much.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very excited to see Erica go next.
Yes, I am too. And it's going to be good to see you on the panel again too.
Yeah, for sure.
All righty.
Okay.